Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Not That Bad, the movie podcast where we cover movies that nobody likes and we tell you why they're not that bad. I am, of course, one of your hosts. My name is Connor, aka Schneez Skywalker, aka the man behind your least favorite Star Wars stan account, Cute Gun Ray, and I am joined today and every day by my illustrious co-host, Mr. Gabe Tice. Gabe, how you doing, buddy?
Well, Connor, like this young man behind me,
I was wondering how long it would take for you to reference the picture
I
behind
am
you.
furious. No, I did not kill women and children, but I'm being forced to talk about none other than Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, which is like when I started this podcast with you, I thought this would be the doomsday scenario that we would eventually arrive to this movie. Other than that, I'm doing pretty good though.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Like he said, ladies and gentlemen, today we have a very special episode. We pushed this on our social media a couple, actually in December when we released our episode 1 episode. Now we are on episode 2. As for redundancy purposes, we're just going to say our episode 2 episode of proportion. I don't know, whatever. This movie is a really interesting one, and it's already fucking with my brain here. Released in 2002. This is a really interesting one. Divides. I won't say divides the Star Wars fandom, but pretty unanimously shit on by everybody. Has a higher rating than I thought it did. I mean, we are a podcast that handles under 3 stars. It is a 2.7. What's your history with this film? I'm curious.
It's the same as with the Phantom Menace, right? So, I grew up having only seen Revenge of the Sith from these prequel movies because I was actually old enough to see Revenge of the Sith in theaters. And, I was just told nothing but awful things about these first 2 prequel films. And it got to the point where like I was honestly scared of the thought that I would watch these and like them, that I would have to be a guy who likes the prequels. That just seemed like a cross I didn't want to bear.
No.
It's hard enough being a Rob Zombie fan, folks.
Hey.
But no, so I go through life just like my only experience with Attack of the Clones was through Lego Star Wars. And then finally, my girlfriend at the time, now fiance, she had all the Star Wars movies on her shelf, and I just said, I realized I haven't seen a couple of these. I haven't seen episodes 1 and 2, and you're like, oh, we have to watch them. And in that context, I had a good time with both movies, but I think you can anticipate that does not mean I think they are great movies, but I'm excited to talk about it.
I'm pumped, man. And it's funny because your history is sort of the opposite of mine. Like I grew up a Star Wars fan, and I grew up watching these. These were my generation's Star Wars, our generations. But I was a part of that fandom at the time when these are coming out, and parents are really into them. I'm really into them, and had all the toys growing up for episode 1 through 3, the video games, anything you could think of. I was all in on the prequel craze as a kid. Had some years as a teenager where they were the worst things in the world to me when the Disney films were coming out, and I was still very much against the prequels. And then over time, the prequels sweetened back up in my brain, and the sequels I pretend don't exist. So this is an interesting balance that we have now, and an interesting world and landscape of Star Wars fandom that's now starting to really come around to the prequels. In fact, this Letterboxd rating was much lower a couple of years ago when I joined.
That's kind of crazy to me.
It's interesting.
And it's, the thing I hate the most about how pop culture conversations tend to go these days is it's really dominated by recency bias. Meaning, if a new movie in a franchise comes out, I mean, people lose their minds if it's just okay, if it's good. It's like the best for, I'm not going to call out any franchise in particular, but I
already know what you're referencing.
Yeah, I see this phenomenon all the time. And it's really annoying. But then if a new one comes out and it's bad or disappointing, then movies that people were really hard on before get elevated.
Well, we're going to get into all of that and more during our conversation today. Doing something interesting with the format. If you're coming directly from our first episode covering episode one, this will be slightly different, but we're you'll see kind of where we're going with it. So, first off, like, look, this movie is going to be really interesting to talk about. I'm excited to get into it. There's a point in the show where we're going to have to discuss some things that we don't like about it and things that the audience really don't like. But I want to start off on a positive note here, and I want to talk about some of the things that we did enjoy. First off, I want to ask you: did you find yourself enjoying a good amount of this movie, or I guess like where was the balance for you? Were you did you have a hard time writing down things that you liked about the movie?
Uh, I um I was so watching it critically is not an entertaining experience. Like if you're watching it in that ironic so bad it's good way with some friends or whatever, it can be fun. But that's a pretty condescending way to talk about a movie. So I'll say the things that I actually thought they did well, that I thought deserved praise. It's a pretty short list. I will actually start off with a hot take, and this is like, even
Ooh.
though you would think that I'm just like one of those people that doesn't like this movie, I do have um, a hot take, which is people are way too hard on Hayden Christensen. They are
Thank
way
you.
too hard on Hayden
Thank you.
Christensen. This poor kid behind me.
That's not a flattering shot, but I
It's
know
not a
what you're
flattering shot.
saying.
Like,
Yes.
obviously, a lot of great memes came out of this movie, and I
Oh
want
yeah.
to embrace that for a second.
Yes, of
Um,
course.
but Hayden Christensen. So we've already established that in this era, and really in any era of his career, but particularly this era, George Lucas is just not an actor's director. His performance suffers from it. I'm not going to tell you that this is a great performance from Hayden Christensen. What I will say is that having seen his other work, he's clearly a very gifted actor that got the raw end of a deal. And it's so bad because people were so excited to see young Anakin Skywalker and felt really let down. But I just watched a movie called Shattered Glass. It's probably Hayden Christensen's kind of like best role. And if you watch that, you can see he really does have a talent and he can really tap in to that dark side. But the problem with Hayden Christensen is his version of dark side is like whiny, angsty, kind of weaselly. Not probably not a great fit for the guy who will eventually become one of the most intimidating villains in cinematic history. But I just have to say that people are so hard on this kid, and it's really undeserved.
Well, I'm gonna say this much. Like, I kind of like that they went the route of the angsty, whiny teenager because that's what they did with Luke in the original trilogy. I mean,
Mhm,
Luke started as this like angsty, whiny
mhm.
teenager, and then you saw him sort of develop into this hero. And I like that this was almost like the perfect juxtaposition of that. Like, you can see the seeds being planted for
Yeah.
him being what he becomes. But I want to agree with you with I'll say this. I think that there are shreds of a good performance in what he
Mhm.
does. There are certain moments in the movie. In fact, this watch was actually great for me for Hayden Christensen and how I feel about him because there was many points in the film where I was like, he's not doing a bad job per se. And I want to get into why I think I say per se later on when we discuss some of the bad things
Yeah.
about it. But
He's
yeah, I
really good
mean,
at he's really good at looks,
yeah,
like when I think of his performance in either this or episode three, his iconic moments are just like that shot of him staring out the window in episode
yeah,
three. Let me say this. They also take some wild swings with this character with Anakin Skywalker. And
they
we'll
do.
get into that. But there's a certain audacity to this movie that I begrudgingly respect. But kind of
Oh
like that,
yeah.
that's just something I'll say for the whole movie, like, the film as a whole.
Oh no, I mean I'll agree, and there's a lot of chances that they take in this, and I think for me, a good amount of them I could say did work. There's some things that I don't I don't know if they should have gone the route that they did with them, and we could that could be a conversation for later in the episode. But I do want to say I do want to if I could get us started on something that I
Mhm.
think is something that I think we both agree on here, and that I want to show a lot of praise of, and it's Padme. It's Natalie Portman's performance as Padme in
Yeah.
this film. It is for me. This is her film. uh, I know a lot of people, would consider, Obi-Wan's performance, or Ewan McGregor's performance as Obi-Wan, probably the shining light of this film. For me, it's all Natalie Portman. I think she does a fantastic job. I think the character is the best that we see her. And it's a character that I love. So seeing her shine through and do as well as she did, especially with some of the lines that she was reading, I gotta throw all that praise at Natalie Portman for what she did in this.
Hey, man, and that's really not that's not something I'm going to disagree with, because this was a really interesting character for the Star Wars universe. Obviously Princess Leia is a strong, independent woman,
Yes.
but I feel like the stakes were really raised with Padme. She's not just a rebellion; she's a politician, and I loved seeing her conflict. I love seeing her navigate, these this really skeezy environment that is politics. And we're going to obviously talk about just how political this movie is, but yeah, watching, like, adding a layer onto her character where she's not just like one of the boys, going pew
Yeah.
pew, right? But she becomes a very interesting character throughout most of these movies to
Yeah.
me. I think they underuse her character actually in episode 3, but she does have one of the more interesting lines in episode 3. So this is how democracy dies, with
Yeah.
thunderous applause. A lot of people shit on that line, and I actually think that's just because by then people just had a lot of ill will towards the dialogue in these
Oh
movies. I
yeah,
actually think,
100%.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's actually pretty cool line, and that sums up the themes of these prequels so well. Um, yeah, Natalie Portman, I think, grew into being an even better actress after this.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, she did Black Swan. You can definitely see the beginning of Natalie Portman, the movie star, in this movie.
Oh yeah, and I have to say too, and I don't know if this is going to be a pro for you, so I guess I'll throw a
Mhm.
little bit of controversy at you, see how you feel about it. But we've mentioned the character of Anakin and the character of Padme so far, and for me, man, like watching through Star Wars, if you're watching all of the movies together, or over the span of a couple of days, whatever you're going to do with it, um, I love the fact that this is the Star Wars love story. I
Mhm.
look, truthfully, like, love
Mhm.
stories don't get me. I don't get them. When I watch them, I laugh at them. I'm just not a romantic guy, much to the
Wow.
chagrin of my
Okay.
wife.
Okay.
So sometimes they do work for me, but majority of the time I'm just laughing at it. But even though there's laughable things about this, I'm not doing that.
Mhm.
I'm enjoying the fact that this is a love story, and I think a lot of it has to do with like the score and different cool moments that happen throughout. But um, whereas I saw a lot of reviews saying that that's terrible that this was a love story basically, and they didn't get enough of what they thought they needed. I love that aspect of this, and I'm curious if you have any opinions on that.
Do I love that it's a love story? I appreciate that direction. I I think it's actually a very interesting direction to, if you're doing Darth Vader, the tragic villain. I think a love story would is like a really good way to really kick that off. Because this is Anakin's origins, and obviously we know that Darth Vader must have been in love, or he had kids with a woman somewhere.
Right.
So so it stands to reason that before he was Darth Vader, he was a man capable of love and compassion. And I will say, I'm trying not to be mean. The execution doesn't like
I
grasp
I
the
get it.
potential of
Yeah.
that. I think having this love story with angsty Anakin is hard for a couple reasons. First, it's hard for us, the audience, to understand why a mature, poised, very official woman like Padme would fall for a teenager who has a penchant for manslaughter. But um, but just going in that direction, I actually think it was a pretty interesting move on George Lucas's part. If he had just brought somebody in the script writing department to help him with the dialogue, with the pacing, um, with characterization. Maybe if you just let somebody else write it, then I often think, you know, we'd be singing a different tune. People would be really enthusiastic and be like, this took Star Wars to a new level. Because I consider myself a pretty sentimental guy. I like romance in movies when
Ah,
it's handled well, and I like when it's there for the story. I mean, I will say this: this is definitely very integral to the story that George Lucas is telling. It's just not told super well, but that's different. That's different than saying it's forced, right? Because we've
right.
seen plenty of forced love stories, and that can be miserable. That can really drag down a movie. This stuff is like cheesy, but it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't. It's not the thing that like drags down the movie for me.
Man, why is Anakin such a fucking simp in this, by the way? You know, like
Because
he is
it's Natalie
so.
Portman,
But
man.
dude,
Come
like,
on.
okay, like, but I know it's Natalie Portman, but like at one point, and I wrote this down, he says, "I've thought about her every day since the last time we met." What the fuck, dude? You can't just like, and he's the shit that he says to her is way worse than that. He's like, if the things that he said
Oh
were in
yeah.
Instagram DMs, oh my, he'd be canceled. I mean, he'd be fucking, they'd be laughing him off the internet. So I just had to, man, Anakin is a
No,
fucking simp in this movie.
Anakin the incel is just not something I wanted to see.
Oh no.
Um,
Oh fuck. Luckily he
no,
doesn't go full incel. He's not like I deserve this, but
right.
it gets close a few times. And
Gets close.
it gets into the execution part of the love story that I don't love as much as the fact that it's
Right.
the love story. Yes.
Right. And you have to talk about that. I mean, when people complain about Hayden Christensen's performance so much, they talk about those moments where he's just like creeping Natalie Portman the fuck out, or making poor Ewan McGregor look like he wants to kill himself with his own lightsaber. It's and it, you know, George Lucas would probably say, well, he's like 18, he's very confused, he was brought up in this weird Jedi order, you know, that's why he's acting so weird. I was like, but you wrote it that way, George. Like you wrote all these conditions, you know. So
But
at
I
the end,
see, I can appreciate some of that though. I can appreciate some of him wanting to make him an awkward character. He's in an awkward phase of his life. It's an awkward situation. I get that. I wish, I think I'm in agreement with you here that I wish some of it was just a little easier to like picture a human being saying. But I think we can both at least agree that like it's a good direction to go, even if his execution was not necessarily what it should have been. Would you agree with that?
I can agree with that. I will also say this, that episode 3 helps with this a lot
Yes.
um because they really do a better job with Anakin all around in that. There's still some wonky execution stuff, but
Right.
overall I can actually buy you know, that in episode 4 when Alec Guinness is like he was a good friend. I buy that he's talking about that guy and not this punk kid. But you know, this is episode 2, so you know there's some leeway to continue building the character. I think Anakin is just an unfortunate piece of collateral damage in a very poorly planned out trilogy. Now, at least it was planned out.
Fuck. Take notes, but
but
no, but
but do you see what I mean? Like, you know, we
yes.
start Anakin when he's 10 years old, and then we go to when he's 18, so we have to switch actors, and then we end up when he's like, I don't know, 25 or something. Um, I would have liked to have seen just one actor play Anakin throughout the whole trilogy. Getting readjusted to Hayden Christensen just feels like this weird, unnecessary kind of roadblock.
It very much feels like the middle movie. I mean, it does suffer from the middle movie syndrome. I do think that's a thing when you have a 3-part story. But I'm curious though, like in the interest of I suppose remaining positive, do you have something else you wanted to highlight here, or something that you did enjoy about the film overall?
Okay, so what I will say, this isn't so much a pro as in it's an anti-con, but thematically, I like a lot of what George Lucas is going for in this movie and throughout these prequels as a whole. Um, Thematically, you know, like theoretically. Um, uh,
I just love your not hatred for George Lucas, but I do
I
think
don't
there
hate
is a
George Lucas.
disdain.
I don't hate. I mean, honestly, you know, George Lucas is like the crazy uncle of cinema. You know, it's like, what are you doing, George? Come back over here. Just stay in your ranch, George.
Oh
Let
God.
Okay. I shouldn't be mean to George Lucas. He's worth more than I will. One day in George Lucas's life is worth more than I will probably attain in a lifetime. So take all of this with a grain of salt. You know, I'm sure George Lucas, he's been getting roasted for a while now. He really does not seem to care. You know, it's just polite jabbing at this point. But what I will say is thematically, you know, the original Star Wars trilogy is a very black and white kind of good versus evil scenario, and it's very black and white politics. You know, it's the evil empire versus the, you know, scrappy do-gooder rebellion. You know, throughout history, we know that it's usually not that simple morally, at least not in the beginnings, not in the way
Right.
these things really form, you know. And there was a lot, I think, open to the idea. Some people are very against this. I mean, there are people who just don't want to see origins explored. But for me, I'm actually interested to wonder how did that scenario kind of form? You know, how did the empire get so huge? Where did the rebellion come from? Why did a good Jedi like Anakin Skywalker become the most evil man in the galaxy? All those questions I think are really worth answering, and I think it's worth answering in a way that some people would call House of Cards in space. But you know, for something a little different than the original trilogy, I think it's cool that so much of this is driven by, you know, the politics of this universe. And now that Andor is out, I think that people will stop saying keep politics out of Star Wars, at least a lot less. But we'll get into the execution in another section. But that theoretically, I actually really do like what George Lucas is going for.
Oh yeah, and you have to talk about when discussing that, you have to really discuss how the story progresses throughout the trilogy, you know. And I think it does. The story itself, you can say what you want about, you know, the rest of the writing, and you know, that's something that we're gonna get to. Trust me, if you're listening to this, we're gonna get there, because it's got to be touched on. But the progression of that story for me is near perfect in execution. I mean, the fact that you see, okay, here's this small child who has all this potential in the world, and then he gets taken to this big city to learn from, you know, the Jedi, and he's going to become a Jedi, and that's very overwhelming to him, and he misses his family, and then, you know, he has nothing left all of a sudden, but he has prospects, he has hope.
Mm.
You know, he's still the chosen one, and then that hope turns into fear, and that fear turns into him turning, and then that turns into possibly the greatest villain in the history of cinema in a lot of ways, one of them,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
at least one of the most iconic ones. And so for me, the way that the story beats go throughout all of the films are near perfect, and this film is part of that. It really is a part of the story
Mm.
flowing, and the stuff that is story related, that's not so heavy on the dialogue, but more so, it's weird. Like the exposition in this film, I feel like is one of the least troublesome pieces of exposition in any film that I've seen, because I'm so interested to see where it's going when they're telling me what's going on, or how characters are feeling, or you know, talking about how there needs to be an emergency vote and fucking Jar Jar's got to be the one to do it. I'm
The
interested. I
fact
want
that
to know
he
what's
put
happening.
Jar Jar at the center of that just shows you, when I talk about audacity, man, I mean, that's audacity.
Oh, I told my wife, I was like, Padme came back from this battle and said, I'm sorry, Jar Jar did fucking what now? He voted for what? I'm sorry. Oh, God.
And of course,
Amazing.
you know, it's not, George Lucas wasn't playing 4D chess and was thinking about Darth Jar Jar. He was, I mean, he was a rich man who saw all of us peasants complaining.
Yes,
And he
100%.
just, you know, he was like, let them have Jar Jar.
Yes.
But do I actually kind of respect that? I kind of do.
I
It's
do.
kind of a boss thing.
I think it's great. I do love though that they put this little line in there. I think they did it as like a wink to the audience, where like he's really excited talking to Padme how much of an honor it is, and then she's like, "Excuse me, don't you have some work to do?" And he's like, "Oh yes," and then he walks away and doesn't say another word. I was like, that feels like a little nod to the audience not liking this guy. But
Oh, sure.
I also love that he was like he generally speaking, like in the whole fucking
I
build
mean,
of this story, he is a very, very important part of it because solely because of this vote. Not even what he did and his contributions in the last film, solely because he is here to vote on behalf of Padme to suggest Supreme Chancellor get the full powers. Uh, that is an extremely important part of this Star Wars puzzle, and that's amazing to me. I just fucking love it.
yeah. Well, I'm glad that you love it because a lot of people do not love it.
That's why I had to highlight it. I love it. It's
Yeah.
fucking great.
Yeah.
Good for
Okay.
George.
Okay. So is there anything else that we can say on our good section before we inevitably tackle some of the not good? I'll call it that.
Honestly, man, I think everything on the planet of Geonosis is incredible. Everything. I
Mm.
mean, when Obi-Wan first shows up there and overhears Dooku talking to the Trade
Oh
Federation,
my God! How could I thank you for
and
reminding me of
Christopher
this?
Lee.
Continue.
I
Yep.
mean,
Yeah.
Christopher Lee is just. I mean, he's fantastic in anything that he's in.
Okay.
So,
That
but
has to
everything
be-
on Geonosis is fantastic.
Yeah. Geonosis actually looks pretty awesome.
Oh yeah,
I think actually, not all the set design here looks great. I think that diner scene that's become a meme in its own right because
yes.
why is there a diner, 1950s diner in Star Wars? But yeah, most of the other stuff looks pretty great. I mean, I remember that water world, not the Kevin Costner movie, you know, the water world from this movie very well from Lego Star Wars, and it appropriately looks very cool here. But my real positive, and I can't believe I almost forgot to bring this up, but George Lucas brought back Christopher Lee. He brought Christopher Lee to the mainstream in a way that no filmmaker had done, because this is before Lord of the Rings. Okay. So Christopher Lee had been most famous for Dracula, but that was generations ago. So the fact that George Lucas brought back Christopher Lee to make him the villain of a Star Wars movie is something that I would absolutely bow down to George Lucas for doing. The problem is that goddamn Christopher Lee doesn't show up for over an hour. And it's
But
even
his presence is felt.
uh,
He
I mean,
leaves
when
an
you-
impression.
yeah. Oh, when he's on screen, absolutely. No, it's a great performance. I mean, it's like he's just one of those fucking kings. Like he's like, yeah, there's Christopher Lee turning out another fucking knockout performance with that awesome voice of his. Yeah, this is also though the movie where the names really start to break down. I mean, Dooku, Count Dooku.
Well, don't forget his Sith name, Darth Tyrannus or Tyrannus, depending on how you want to pronounce it.
Tyrannus.
Yeah.
Tyrannus. Yeah.
Tyrannus is how I think that they pronounce it and prefer to pronounce it in the Star Wars universe, but it could be easily pronounced either way. But I do want to say though, like we brought up Christopher Lee. I feel like every time Christopher Lee is brought up, I just have to bring up the fact that towards the end of his life, he had a short career in folk metal. If nobody has heard those or looked at the album covers, I strongly encourage you to look that up as soon as you finish listening to this podcast. But he does a great job, in my opinion, with everything that he's given in this. And everything that takes place on that planet of Geonosis, from the initial Obi-Wan showing up and spying on them to them taking on those creatures in the battle arena, to the big duel between the the Jedi and the droids in the battle arena, the big fight with the clones when they show up. I mean, I love all of that stuff. I think it's all done very well. It's also one of the least heavy on the dialogue. I don't know if that's coincidental or not, but fantastic overall. Just that whole everything on that planet to me is done so well, and I had to make sure that I brought that up before we moved on, because I think it's one of those things that I think even detractors of the movie really love, that Genosian battle sequence, but it would.
I'm mixed on it. I mean, it's obviously people are grateful that they could see a whole army of Jedi fighting. That's something that we still haven't seen by the time of this movie, and that's one reason to do a prequel, to see the Order of the Jedi coming together, and that's one of the only times the Order of the Jedi does something useful in any of these movies. which is another huge complaint. I just think it's funny, honestly. Or they're they're the bureaucrats of the galaxy, I guess. Just like fucking red tape everywhere. Poor Obi-Wan's gone off to some water planet to hunt down Boba Fett, and they don't know what to fucking tell him.
Oh, I love those scenes too, by the way. That everything that's done over there too. I mean, there's just like this eeriness about Camino, you know? It's just
Right.
like I don't know, there's something about it. There's the most of like the different planets that we get to see, like I mean, it's done very well. They all look pretty good. They all
Mm.
yeah, I like all that stuff. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had to make sure we brought that up in the positives.
Okay. Okay. No, and I really don't um I don't want to come down on anything involving Christopher Lee, so I'm happy with that.
There we go. Anything else you wanted to highlight before we talk about? I think the thing that everybody wants us to talk about and see where we stand on. Well, I don't know that they give a fuck where
Okay.
we stand on it, but
I this is a very polarizing thing about this movie, so I kind of want to just address it here. Yoda's lightsaber fight.
ooh,
Yoda's lightsaber duel with Count Dooku. People who hate the scene maybe take Star Wars a little too seriously. I
dude, do
think
people
to
really hate this?
yeah. Oh
Fuck
my god.
me.
They're like, dude, Yoda's supposed to be all about the force, bro. Giving him a lightsaber ruins the point. No, watching him flip around with the force is awesome. It's like,
It is.
yeah. I mean, I think people misunderstand what that scene means. I mean, Yoda is still using the force. He's still, I mean, he's not using it to like lift rocks and stuff, but the force is what is helping him uh perform combat so well. The same way that the force helps Luke in combat throughout the original trilogy, right? So I think people really come down on this movie. I'm talking about purists. I think casual moviegoers were just like, this is fucking awesome. I love
You're
this.
right.
Because if you're like me and Yoda's your favorite character, you don't want to just see him, be some old hermit on Dagobah. I want to see him in action. I want to see what he can do, you know? And the answer was pretty satisfying. I mean, it's hilarious. It's not epic in the way that maybe George Lucas thought, but it is epic. It's like watching the Muppets kind of like invade Star Wars.
How different would that scene have been if they still had to use a puppet?
It might have been. I guess it would have been impossible. It
It's
would have
why
been
I'm not
impossible.
too upset with them. Like, do if they wanted to show Yoda's full capabilities as a Jedi, I'm not completely against making him a CGI character. I
Mm,
wish if I have a problem with them replacing the puppet with the CGI character. Like I would have had a problem with them doing that in the original Star Wars films. But I agree, dude. It's awesome. They built it into the Star Wars lore that smaller Jedi like him have that sort of fighting style where they have to use unpredictable movements and jumps to get themselves ahead because they have a shorter reach advantage and all of these different things. Like
mm,
so, they made it work in the Star Wars universe. I'm kind of upset to see that Star Wars fans hate it, and to be honest, it's hard for me to stay dialed in with what Star Wars fans do and don't like because almost every Star Wars group that I join, I am you almost immediately just fucking bullied out of for my opinions on Star Wars. So like I'm sad to see that people hate that, but I'm gonna agree with you that I think that's a pro for
yeah.
many ways, in many ways.
I mean, it's way better than the lightsaber fight that came before it. Which, unfortunately, remember how I said the Darth Maul fight in Episode One was just so great it elevated the movie, and
Oh, you
that's
didn't like
just
the Dooku and versus Obi-Wan and Anakin fight.
I thought it was weird. I thought it was like handled awkwardly. There's like one shot where the lightsabers are kind of spinning around their faces, but it's kind of like
Well, yeah,
off
that
center, and
part's
it looks like they're in like a lot somewhere with the lights shut off. Yeah, so I just didn't think it was not a remarkable fight. I'll put it that way. Um,
That's interesting. I really liked the fight overall. That scene I've always thought is awkward, and I know why they did it. It's because like the lightsabers themselves don't have a glow, and they can't. If it, at the time they couldn't make ones that had a glow
Mhm,
that they could use properly in a fight. So like I get why it looks like it does. I think it's also awkward, but I like the
mhm.
fact that it shows how fucking good Dooku is because he outclasses one of the best Jedi on the council when it comes to fighting styles, which is
Mhm.
Obi-Wan. And this kid Anakin shows a lot of promise against him, but he still just completely wrecks
Yeah,
him. Like he just
I do
destroys
like
him.
that.
Sets the pace for the next movie.
It sets up a pretty cool payoff for
Yes.
episode three. Um, and then it's funny. I remember now seeing episode three in the theater when I was just like 7 or 8, and Christopher Lee all of a sudden shows up, and I was already a big fan of his Dracula movies. And then I didn't even realize that. Oh my god, he's from one of the other movies. I just thought it was like a cool little Christopher Lee cameo. No, but then he kicks their asses, and then you think Anakin and Obi-Wan are toast, and then in walks little Yoda on his cane. It's actually like it's really well done. It's
It
so funny to
is.
me.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's
It,
hilarious. It's great. He walks in with the cane, he drops the cane, fucking handles his business, man. It's great.
yeah, and you got Frank Oz back, and it's just great to hear his voice. And I really wonder what Frank Oz thought of, because when they were doing Empire, there's no way they could have imagined that this character would be performing a big fight like that. So
Right.
I don't know. It's fun to think of what people involved were thinking when these prequels were being made. I would like somebody to write a tell-all book, but that will probably never happen.
No, I don't think so either. I think yeah, I don't think it'll ever happen. The fact that we don't have a way to watch the original cuts of the first Star Wars movie is all you need to know about how this franchise is handled.
Right, right.
So there we go.
So
I think that's
I'd
time.
say
I
it's.
think it's
I
that
think it's
time.
time.
We're gonna get into the part of the show that I think everybody really wants to dive into, and we're gonna talk about your complaints. We're gonna talk about our complaints. I want you to kick this off for us because I have a feeling if I start somewhere, I might get a little ranty, and I don't want to do that to start us off. So I want you to kick us off if you could, because
You're
I
going to be ranty.
yeah I might get a little
How do
mad
you think
here.
I feel? This movie is really unfortunate to me. Um, it really hurts that George Lucas just did not learn from the Phantom Menace. There's so many things that he either missed or decided to double down on out of spite that really hurt this movie. First off, just to me, this movie doesn't have a story. I mean, it doesn't have like a through line. It doesn't like Star Wars used to be simple. Princess Leia gets captured, Luke has to go save her. Oh my God, the Empire is striking back. Everybody has to run away while Luke trains. For me, the whole intrigue that they try to set up is just very muddled, and
Hmm.
then you combine it with maybe you'll disagree with this, but when you combine that with the politics of it, like if you asked me to sum up Attack of the Clones in a log line, I would have a pretty hard time. I would just say Anakin is really thirsty, um, and
Anakin is a
Padme,
fucking simp. And
yeah,
you see some
and
Jedi juju, as one of the characters says at one point.
that's terrible. That's one of those lines, man.
Jedi
Honestly, the
juju.
love story might be the story here, at least as far as like what I took away from the movie. Um, I mean, even the Phantom Menace, like I could still like, there's something with the Trade Federation, and they had to save Padme. It's like it's way too convoluted, but I could sum it up easier than this movie.
I'm glad we started here because I can actually provide an alternative thought
Okay,
process there. I
okay.
actually did enjoy the direction that they took with this with the story. I love the fact that as the separatists and the Trade Federation are growing towards basically going to war with the Republic. we see that the Republic, who originally would have been completely ill prepared for this, suddenly finds out about this clone army. And they're like, what the fuck is this about? Who put this in? Oh, the guy who's been dead for 10 years? That makes no sense. Okay, what's going on here? Oh, the guy that they cloned is the guy that just tried to kill Padme earlier on. Okay, all right, this is getting interesting. There's just so many like twists and turns, but along those twists and turns, I'm engaged, and that's all I can ask a movie to do, in my opinion, is engage me and entertain me. And I feel as far as the story goes that it accomplished that for me. Um, it, I don't know that it would be the easiest thing to sum up in a log line, but I also think some of the greatest movies that people love are hard to sum up in a log line that would really capture what the film is.
Yeah, but
Um,
are they usually summer blockbuster
no,
adventure
and
movies?
that's where I'll give it to you, and
Mhm.
that's what I think. I appreciate that it went there because of my love for Star Wars. I can see something like this any day of the week and appreciate it, but I can also see why somebody who's not as into, especially the prequels, or Star Wars as a whole, would watch this and be like, maybe this movie's boring, or maybe I just don't get
Mhm.
it, maybe I just don't care. I get it, but for me, like, you could do something like this any day as far as the story goes, and I'd be the happiest fucking camper that you've ever seen.
Yeah, it just I don't know. I compare it to episode 3, which to me, it's just as political. It's just about the machinations
Yeah.
and the behind the scenes sort of intrigue. But the arc there is so clear to me, and what I'm supposed to be there for is so clear to me. And I always come back to this feeling that I don't think George Lucas wanted to make a trilogy. I think he really wanted to make a movie about Anakin becoming Darth Vader. Um, and somewhere along the way, he got the idea that this could be a trilogy either for money, because he does think like that. He's made plenty of monetary fiscal decisions
He
in
has.
his art for, or he liked the symmetry of the old trilogy, the prequel trilogy. So I just think this being a trilogy is just I hope this doesn't make anybody sad. I think it was a mistake. At least in this
Hmm.
current form, it was a mistake. There's probably a good version of this out there, but a Red Letter Media pointed this out that the original that movie Chronicle, the found footage movie,
Yeah.
told a story very similar to Anakin's turn to Darth Vader in just 80 minutes, and it did it a lot better, more concisely, just more in a more compelling fashion, in my opinion, than this kind of very muddled, convoluted 3-act structure we got here.
I'm certainly a biased party on this. I am it's something that I have always enjoyed. I like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that we see Anakin as a child. We see what he's like, what his upbringing was, how he came to be. We see how, he ended up falling in love with the person who would birth the children that we would see carry on the legacy of Star Wars, which we've already seen, but, in the story context, births the most important people in the Star Wars story. And I like the fact that there's, the beginning, the middle, and the end, and they're separated out. Even if not everybody can appreciate that part, I think without us having this love story to see how they came to be, not necessarily how he came to be, but you do see some of that. You see that he has a fear of losing. Now he fears losing Padme because of this, and I don't know that could have. I guess my argument towards that is that I don't know if it could have been aired out with some of the moments that needed to have the air to breathe, or that needed a bit more to it. I don't know that
Yeah,
that could have been done in one. Maybe it could have been done in two.
it's
Maybe
just
it could have
it's.
been, a two. But I don't know. I've always appreciated that about
I guess here's my
with.
counterpoint. Like I said, I saw Revenge of the Sith without having seen the other two
Right.
prequels. I was just a kid, and yet I got it. I felt like
Yeah.
I was not missing anything. Now you could say, well, that's because Revenge of the Sith is actually a pretty good movie with a very well told story, which it is. But um, I feel like that's still a testament to how lacking the other two are in character development and story, that you can come in them. Like you can't just watch Return of the King, as great as that movie is, and feel like you have the whole story, because it's really not. It's not structured to be that way. Same thing, I think, for any like really effective third in a trilogy. You know, the Bourne Ultimatum, Spider-Man 3. That Spider-Man 3 was supposed to be a joke
I
for
was
all of
thinking
you listeners out there.
there, but
But honestly, even Spider-Man 3, you would still like the first two are very integral to your appreciation or lack thereof of Spider-Man 3.
well, I will say though, I you could argue that not that wouldn't necessarily always need to be the case because I would argue that you could watch, and I know how you feel about this movie, so bear with me. This is more so for the audience.
All right.
You could watch Return of the Jedi without having watched Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back and understand what's happening. You could watch Die Hard with a Vengeance, not having watched the first two Die Hard films, and
That's
be
a
completely fine.
that's a pretty unique case. I mean, those are very episodic movies. That's
But I
not
would argue
yeah.
that this is also that.
No, it's not.
They're
It's like
they're literally titled episodes.
okay, but there's supposed to be a through line of an arc that ties them all together, you know. Just like the original Star Wars trilogy, they're not episodic. It's all about the rebellion taking down the empire, you know.
Would you argue
It's
that there's not a through line in the trilogy?
I'm saying it's very weak. That I guess is
Oh,
what I'm
okay.
saying.
I get what you're
Yeah,
saying now.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm saying he took a very simple, concise idea and stretched it out to make it a trilogy, even though that just, you know, when you stretch things out, you add in unnecessary plot lines, you set up roadblocks so things don't progress naturally. You start at a place that's kind of awkward. And like, let me just say this, you know, to me, 2 and 3 are companion pieces in a lot of ways. And one just feels like totally like off in the distance, like just like that's like has nothing to do almost because it has some different actors. It takes place in completely like very different locations, and I don't know, you know.
No, I definitely put them together because truthfully, like, and I said this in our Phantom Menace episode, it very much feels like the '90s Star Wars experience. It still feels like a movie that was made in like the late '90s era, and I feel like the 2000s is defined by those two films, and they don't feel that way. Plus, I think a big part of it too is how they were shot. The Phantom Menace had a lot
Yeah.
of on location. It was shot on film for the
Mhm.
most part. So, and then you get to these, and they were shot digitally with a
Yes.
lot of CGI and green
Yes.
screen, which is another thing that we got to get to.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we're about to segue to one of people's biggest complaints and one of my
Yes.
biggest complaints, the total lack of practical effects and the complete over reliance on computer generated VFX. You know, I'm actually curious to hear your stance on this, being that you're obviously, you know, you feel differently about this movie than I do.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a simp for the Star Wars universe, you could say. So I'm simping for Star Wars,
Do you
like
simp for the
Anakin's
Star
simping
Wars
for.
universe? Yeah, as much as
Yeah,
Anakin simps
100%. Yeah,
Padme. Wow,
100%.
wow, that's
Uh,
some bad simping.
it's terrible, but no. In all, to be truthful here, it's a problem that I have. I think it's hard for me to really have it take away from my experience. There are moments where I think it does take away from what's happening. I think there's a lot of things that they could have done practically in this that they did not, and I don't want to call that lazy because I know a lot of work went into making it look as good as it
Oh,
did, and there
I
are
wouldn't
a
call
lot
it
of scenes
lazy.
that do still look
Mhm.
good, but I've always been somebody who just appreciates practical more than digital.
Mhm.
There are things that I really appreciate about digital. I mean, watching a breakdown of the shots that are digital in the movie Parasite just blew my mind. I had no
Mhm.
clue some of the things that they did in that. And when you can blend it and make it look that natural, I have a great appreciation for these kind of effects. Or when you have an idea that's just so great that it has to be visual effects. In fact, I hate to even say this because I know that this is a scene that a lot of people really felt was kind of egregious with its use of CGI. But there's the chase sequence at the beginning of the film after
Uh-huh.
uh, uh, Zam Wessel tries to kill Padme, and I
God, the
love
names
that
in this
sequence.
movie.
Yeah,
I'm
I know.
sorry.
No, I love that sequence. I think it's very well done. I think it doesn't look all that bad. There's parts of it that are a little testy, but in a majority sense, it doesn't look terrible. But then there's scenes that just should not have been. And I mean, there's that scene where Anakin's riding on the back of that animal in the fields of Naboo, and then he falls down and gets rolled over. It looks fucking awful. So there are parts where I really feel it takes away from the movie, but overall, like I just miss the depth that you get with a real set. I miss the feeling you get from practical elements. Even though it doesn't completely take away from the film for me, I get why it's a complaint. And I'm
Yeah.
curious because it sounds like it's something that's a big point for you.
Well, it's like they took something that made the original Star Wars so magical. The practicality, the fact that there was really an environment for those actors to play in. There was really something on camera for
Yeah.
the audience to marvel at. And in this movie, so I'll bring up a story that Hayden Christensen said that his favorite scene to shoot in this movie was the bar scene, which is really not a big scene at all, but it's because that was actually a set they built, one of the few sets they built.
Yes.
And
It
I
was a
just
very
think
good
about
set, by the way.
it was a really great set.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about like these actors having to walk around these green screens and talk to, you know, red X's and like, you know, balls on a stick rather than, you know, anybody else really on sets. You know, they weren't acting against anything, which
Yeah.
is a really difficult situation as an actor who's used to, you know, like Ewan McGregor has a theater background, and all these actors, they're used to working with co-stars.
Right.
And you know, that's part of the job. Obviously, it's Star Wars. It's not going to be it's Shakespeare, but um, it, you know, this is what I mean when I say George Lucas is not an actor's director. Like he wasn't thinking about what could be better for the actors when he was making these decisions. You know, I think he had a shiny new toy that he loved. You know, computer generated effects, and he, I think, genuinely had this like huge passion for it. And you know, there's creativity, there's imagination on display.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
And obviously, some stuff would have had to be done with digital, a la you know, Yoda kicking ass.
Yeah.
But
Well, exactly. Right.
yeah, but I'm saying like there were so many parts of this movie where I'm wondering why didn't they build a set for this? Why didn't you know they build a suit for this? You know, put somebody in makeup. Um, why is you know it just felt like I was watching Star Wars the video game, the PS2 game, rather than Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. So that's where my big problem comes in. It just scrubs the movie of like a real like humanity or something akin to that, right? Like a real like people made this, you know,
Right.
it feels like AI art.
Well, and I want to say this too, and you know, like I did get some feedback from our episode one episode,
Oh,
Phantom
nice.
Menace episode, where people were like, hey, you know, you didn't really rebuke anything or agree with anything that was said about George Lucas from your co-host there, and I was like, you know what, I really didn't say how I feel about George Lucas in those, so I want to say that now with this point, because you know. George created something that is such a huge part of my life. Like I think of a lot of very happy memories when I think of Star Wars. I have a huge Star Wars collection. It's very important to me as a whole. So for that, I have to thank the guy. And truthfully, if he was still involved in Star Wars, I think it would be better off than it is. And I won't get into that state, but you know, I think it would be better off than it is. Having said that, though, he is a guy who lives and dies by what he believes, and sometimes he pushes so hard for something that I don't understand. And people can criticize him all they want about, you know, implementing things into films that he knows are going to be toyetic or going to sell a bunch of tickets or whatever it's going to be. And you know, you can say what you want about that. I really don't have an opinion either way on it.
Mhm.
But the one thing that I will say is that I really don't understand why his hill that he has to die on is his way or the highway. And it's not always that way, don't get me wrong. Like Marsha Lucas did save Star Wars, the original Star Wars film, because of
That's
her
what's so shocking about his
but
attitude, his cavalier attitude. Like, I mean, if he's honest with himself, he knows that other people helped make Star Wars a
oh
success.
yeah.
But he acts with it's kind of like bravado, like his is the only opinion that matters. to the point where he goes in, and this is something that really pisses me off. He goes in and to other directors' films. You know, he didn't direct episode 5 or episode 6. He goes into those films without the consent of those directors, and he changes things. He fucks with them because I guess in his mind he really is Star Wars. You know, the way that Palpatine is the Senate, he is Star Wars.
Well, and the big thing too is like I don't understand. Like, okay, CGI didn't really exist or didn't exist when he was making the original trilogy. All of a sudden, here it is, and if you really had parts of that story that you wanted to tell that now are possible with CGI, and you want to show the world that, okay, I appreciate that, and I appreciate watching that version of Star Wars. But I should not have to rely on fucking bootleggers to watch Star Wars as it was originally intended to be watched. I should not rely on bootleggers to watch The Return of the Jedi the way that it was originally released. I shouldn't rely on bootleggers or VHS copies to watch an original cut of a movie. It's like, you know, imagine they came out with the fucking producer's cut of Halloween 6, and then they were like, well, sorry, we're not going to release the original version ever again, and we're not going to put it on any streaming services, and you're never going to be able to purchase it or own it ever again on any platform. Everybody be fucking pissed about it. And I think they should be pissed about it with Star Wars. I don't know why he wanted to die on that hill. And he learned from the criticisms of audiences in 1997 and in 1999 that the over-reliance on CGI when the edits of the original trilogy came up and when fucking Phantom Menace came out, he learned that people it's great when you use it well, but it doesn't dazzle people like it dazzles you. And I think the fact that he died on that hill with these last 2 films in the trilogy is something that's really unfortunate, because there's so many moments that I think could have been helped by practicality, and he wasn't doing that. So I definitely don't have a strong opinion like you do, but this is something that there's another thing too that I'm really upset about George Lucas, and I'm gonna get to that because I'm gonna fucking rant in a few minutes. But
oh my god,
that's my
that
thing.
wasn't the rant. That wasn't
no.
The rant?
Oh no, it's gonna get there. Yeah.
Okay, I might have to take a coffee break while Connor goes off. To jump off of that, I think it's, and I realize like now we're like barely talking about Attack of the Clones, but to be honest, the much more interesting conversation to me is like what was really going on with these trilogies, you know, to talk about it as just like this one cohesive thing, because even though I like some of these prequels better than others, it was clearly made by the same person. And I really want to dive into the mindset. And I realized he is not an on-set guy. Like, I don't think he likes the experience of being on a movie set and directing actors, directing his production team, coordinating all of that. And from what I've heard him say, I think he might even agree with that. He talks about it like it's exhausting, draining. So I think actually he can't wait to get into post-production. He can't wait to start working with his special effects team or his editors, you know, because that's really where he has control. Like he can do whatever he wants there. And
I feel like he thrives there too, which we saw because the 2 movies that he did not direct were the 2 best received films in the franchise. I mean, the first one is well received because it's the original, but people genuinely do love the last 2 films of the original trilogy.
Do people like 6 more than 4?
I do.
I'm not asking you. I mean, I'm talking about the fandom.
Yeah, there are fans that do. I mean, generally speaking, 1 is most people's favorites when you talk about like Star Wars fans, like deep Star Wars fans. Most of the time, they will say that the original film is their favorite. But I know a lot of people who really appreciate Episode 6 in the Star Wars fandom and rank it very highly, at the very least above all of the things that were done in the prequels. But a lot of times over one of the other 2 films, whether it's Episode 4 or Episode 5.
Yeah, no, I mean, but it is really important to remember that he did not direct those 2. You know, when you get to this movie, I feel like he just reached a critical mass of that mindset. Like this is almost an animated film, a successor to a movie that was, I think by now people were starting to realize that was not a great film, Phantom Menace. Because famously people like acted like it was really good when it came out.
I do think people believed at the time, coming out of the theater, in that experience that it was. I genuinely believe that those people, some people say like it looks like everybody talked themselves into it. I do believe in watching some of those interviews like straight out of the theater that people did enjoy the movie, but sometimes when you sit on things for a little while, that changes. I
Or
know
when
what
you
that's
see it
like.
again.
Or
Yeah,
when you
when you
see it
see it
again, and
again,
that can
that's
change.
yeah. But with this movie, it didn't have that honeymoon period. I mean,
It
I
did
think
not, know.
yeah,
It was
and I
shredded pretty much immediately.
it was shredded immediately for really good reason. Because you know what, a lot of people thought George Lucas made mistakes with the Phantom Menace, but come on, he hasn't directed a movie in 20 years. He will get better, and he did not. He got worse, and I think that really soured people.
Yeah, and I just have to, so we've discussed a lot of things that definitely have are problematic in this film, and we talked about potentially getting into the acting because it's something that a lot of people have complaints about, but there's an argument to be made about the acting in this film being the fault of the dialogue. We've made a lot of allusions to the dialogue throughout this episode. Um,
Do we have
want
to
to
talk about the dialogue?
we got to talk about the dialogue. It's everybody's biggest complaint about the movie.
What is there to say about it? It's bad. It's legendarily bad.
Yeah, yeah. This is where I'm going to go on a bit of a rant. I'm not going to make it long. But I'm. It really does, like, it genuinely makes me angry, because I'm very much a proponent of like these are movies. Don't take them too seriously, and you'll be just fine. And I'm not taking it too seriously when I say that this is one of the worst written, widely released films of all time when it comes to dialogue. It's laughable at times. There are times where you really truly wonder if George Lucas has ever had a genuine conversation with another human being. And what makes me so upset most about this is that this is the film of all of Star Wars that you had to get it right. Because when you write a spectacle blockbuster action sci-fi film about drama in space, you got to get something right, and the dialogue has to be good enough, which I think it was in the original trilogy, and to an extent some of the Phantom Menace. But this is the film that you really had to nail it, because now you don't have as much spectacle. You don't have as much to distract the audience from the absolute mind-boggling mind of somebody who I don't believe has normal conversations with people throughout most of their entire life, which is George Lucas. Because let me tell you, if he really had conversations with people, he'd be able to read back his script like you've probably done, like I've probably done many times, and say nobody on fucking planet Earth would ever say this to another person.
Counterpoint, and I can't believe I'm one to actually try to defend this, but this is what he was probably thinking. These are aliens. Like, he
He may have
started
been.
to write them like aliens, which he did not. I mean, Han Solo, Luke, Leia, they all sound like normal people that we can relate to. I mean, you got people like Yoda who has this weird syntax, but
Right, yeah.
he's a little green guy. Like the human actors shouldn't feel so foreign to us all of a sudden in 5 movies in.
That's the problem. You first of all you have to keep consistency, but also like you're doing. You talk about him not being an actor's director, and I'm gonna agree with that point. But I'm also gonna say that he's not a fucking actor's writer, because if he was, he would understand. Like there is a shining example for this that is literally sounds like a fucking scene from The Room when they are in the elevator at the beginning of the movie and they're talking about like things that have happened to sort of bridge the time, like, oh, that time I saved you from that pit. It's so fucking unnatural. It makes me uncomfortable. I cringe every time I watch it. And there's so many scenes in this film that just could have benefited from one other person taking a look at it. And I think this is the one that I really miss the input from Lawrence Kasdan on these scripts, because
Right,
he was a
right.
lot of the reason that the dialogue was not as bad in the other films. And it's just
Episode 5 has great dialogue.
it's great. And episode 4, like, it's not fantastic, but it's not awful, and
It's
episode 6
spotty.
is not fantastic and it's not awful. But then you get to the Phantom Menace, and like there's scenes that I could defend in it, but I talked about how the dialogue wasn't great in that film. how could you get worse with a movie this big and this
And
important?
the thing is, episode 3, right? Even though I like it, and we won't be covering it on this podcast, the dialogue is not what I like about it, right? I like it in spite of the dialogue. I
But
remember
there
actually
are
watching,
moments in that movie where the dialogue is written well. It's the best written dialogue
and
of
I've
any of these three movies.
yeah, and I've already highlighted one line, and there Obi-Wan and again, have some good banter here and there. George Lucas, like his love dialogue, his romance dialogue, just whenever he approaches that area, I mean, he just breaks down. So I don't know what that's about. Because there's that really infamous scene in episode 3 where she's like, am I so beautiful because I'm so in love? And he's like, no, it's because I'm so in love with you. All right.
You know
All
what's
right,
funny
Anakin, are you,
though?
like, is he saying she's not really beautiful? Is that what he's saying?
You know what's really funny about that though? There's one scene that is an exception to that, and it, believe it or not, makes me more angry that the rest of the movie is not written well. Because I don't believe that this was written by George Lucas. This part, there's a scene where they're sort of in this like tunnel right before they're
Right.
about to go out into the arena, and this is the scene where Padme finally expresses her love for Anakin, and I actually really enjoy how that scene is written. I enjoy the dialogue during it, and I'm not cringing at it. It's what makes the love story work for me. In fact, that scene is near perfect for me because the score works so well with the dialogue delivery and the way that it's paced, and it's just perfect. And then you get to every other scene in this movie that's not that. And it's some of it literally when I say it is the as a Star Wars fan, I am saying this is one of the worst written wide release films of all time when it comes to dialogue, and I don't feel bad about saying that.
And that is not
It's
a hot
awkward as
take.
shit.
And I get the impression from George Lucas that not only does he know this about his own writing, he kind of like, I think he thinks that it's cool that he can get away with writing dialogue this bad. It's still like, a huge wide release that he made millions and millions of dollars off of. Again, in a way, there's a weird respect I have for this brazenness. It's kind
Right.
of, it's very, I mean, would you say that Rob Zombie might be something akin to? He's a better director, but is he similar to George Lucas in a lot of unexpected ways?
I I think so. There's similarities that I can see between the two. Like I think both of them have a good eye and a good story building ability, but I think both of them need to have their scripts written by different people.
Mhm.
Both of them, and that's those. And look, I do appreciate George Lucas as a director. I like Star Wars Episode 4. I like this trilogy. So I do have appreciation for him, but he has his faults, and it's like he and Rob are two people that like somebody tells them what their faults are, and they're like, okay, fuck you, I'm gonna double down on that then. Like,
Yeah, I
no,
think
that's a
that's where I'm
fault.
really getting at
Yes,
is
I will
you
agree
know
100% with that.
yeah. Um, Even though like I mean, but George Lucas again, he like when it comes to any on set, like that's the difference between them. Rob loves being on set. I don't know if he hates
Yeah.
post production, but I think he really thrives on set, and he loves working with his actors. That's why he's there.
Yes.
So the fact that you got all of those problems combined with a really weird, dispassionate approach to almost every aspect of this movie, other than what the special effects can do. Again, you reach critical mass here, and he got better for episode 3, which is not a great movie. Unfortunately, upon my rewatch, I realized it had way more of these problems than I remembered, but it's still a good movie. I don't know who talked to him. I don't know if the fan backlash just got that bad or what, but he stepped it up. And I really appreciate that because Revenge of the Sith is my third favorite Star Wars movie.
Oh.
Yeah,
So for you it would be Empire, then Star Wars, then Revenge of the Sith.
that's right.
Okay, I appreciate that. And look, I agree. I would argue personally. I do feel honestly that episode 3 is a great movie. I will say that, and I will die on that sword. I feel that way. But I think that's one of those things where, and that's what the end of this episode I think is going to come down to, is that no matter, we may have the same problems with the film, but they might weigh differently for us. And we may not have the same problems, but our problems that we have, may, as few as they are, may weigh more than somebody who has a million problems with a movie.
Mm.
And so this will be interesting once we get down to our final verdicts here. But man, like was there anything else as far as, like, we've talked about the things that I think the fans really hate about it, and they're things that we either
Mm.
so far have either agreed with or not agreed with. I mean,
Mm.
truthfully, I think the writing was, and I want to see if you agree with this before we end this section at the very least. Would you agree that the writing was probably the biggest disservice that caused the acting to be criticized? Like, do you think the actors weren't capable, or do you think it was really just the writing being so
No,
fucking
dude,
god shit awful? Like,
we've got great actors in this movie, man.
great, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like world class. I mean, we have Samuel L. Jackson in here, and somebody once, I think it was the Amazing Atheist, once said, if you make Sam Jackson boring, then you know that you're just not cut out to direct actors. Because I mean, I could kind of appreciate the fact that Sam Jackson is doing something different than his, what he's famous for, playing a very
yeah.
stoic character. I think you saw that side to his acting much better in Unbreakable. And this character, this is just very awkward for him. And I don't know why he has a purple lightsaber. I mean, I know why, but it's just they don't explain it in the movie, and it's weird.
Well, by then though, like once he that opened like the floodgates, because then there were tons of different lightsaber colors besides the main two that started appearing in the Star Wars universe. But I love the fact that he just showed up on set and he's like, "Can I have a purple one?" And George Lucas is like, "All right, that's
Yeah,
fine."
but we got great actors in here, and when you watch all their other movies, you see what they're capable of with the right material. So no, it's not the actor's fault. It's a one-two punch of bad dialogue given to them and a bad director to work with. Bad, at least in terms of directing them. And again, there are performance moments here that I appreciate when dialogue doesn't come up, or even the rare dialogue that isn't so egregious that doesn't get in the way. I actually think Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen have some pretty good chemistry. I should have highlighted that when we were
I
talking about
agree.
the love story. Um, you know, uh, so no, it's really not an actor thing. It's very rarely the actor's fault. If it is the actor's fault, well, then you also have to ask, why did the director cast them? That's for me, it always comes back to the director when it comes to actors. That's a big thing for me. And like when it's one actor, maybe you can forgive the director, but when it's the whole cast and you have like world-class actors, then I mean, what other conclusion can you draw?
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I do want to also highlight one other line from this movie, where Obi-Wan says to Anakin, "Why do I get the feeling you're going to be the death of me?" And I put foreshadowing. I wonder if that's going to come back later in the Star Wars story. But yeah, I mean, we've ranted about the writing. We've ranted about a few things. We've talked about a few things as well. Not everything was a rant. I would argue that we were very reserved for how most people act towards this film. But
Yeah, I
as
didn't
far
wish death
as,
on anybody.
oh
You
my
know.
God, no! Like, but breaking away from the things, like
Mm.
we covered Hayden earlier about how we feel about him. So I don't feel the need for us to really dive into it here. But I guess, what problems do you have with the film that might not be what some of the audience is saying, if you have any that you want to bring up?
I mean, this movie's been nitpicked to death, right? So
I
it's
would
kind of
agree
hard to
with
say
that. Yeah.
something that people haven't already said. And um, yeah, that's a good question because definitely like people have come up. I mean, like that diner, people have memed the shit out of that, and I'm watching it just thinking like it's weird that there's a diner here, and people have covered that very efficiently. um yeah, I would just say uh that it's great that we visited so many worlds for the sake of the Lego Star Wars game, because there were some fun levels in that game. But this world hopping thing, I think one reason Empire is so great is because, and you can say this about Return of the Jedi, we actually get put on one environment that we get very used to, you know, Dagobah, and then what's the forest thing? Endor, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's also something very good for both the actors and the audience. But for here, like, I don't think there are two scenes that take place in the same location. And it's kind of cool. And it helps give a sense of adventure. But for me, it was just like another thing that I had to keep up with. Like, okay, where are we now? Like, where are we now? I can't remember the names of any of these places, you know? So that's a very minor complaint, but it's not something I've heard brought up too often. So I thought I'd throw that out there.
I'm glad to hear something that's different than what I normally hear, because I really haven't heard that. In fact, for most people, I hear that they love that the fact that we touch on more planets that we didn't really get to explore. Like we're getting a big
Right.
exploration of the Star Wars universe. So in
Because
a weird way, I appreciate hearing that because it's
this is
different.
supposed to be world building the movie, basically.
Well, yes, but you know,
Right.
I will say that it didn't bother me.
Mhm.
I appreciated. I'm on the side that appreciates the planet hopping a little bit, but I can definitely see, like, you know, I'm not blind to the fact that it could be a problem for some people, and I get why.
Okay.
So,
That's fair. What about
but
you? I mean,
no,
you're the Star
honestly,
Wars
like,
expert.
I really don't have anything else that bothers me really, and I really hate to say this, but like my biggest complaint is really my only complaint, and it's the dialogue is just absolute dog shit, dude. Like it's just the worst. I
But
weigh it very heavily.
it's not just that. I mean, the whole script is just full of problems. Would you agree with that? I mean, pacing, structure, characterization.
I don't know that I would. I really
Hmm.
don't. Like,
It's very interesting to me.
yeah, like there's definitely some problems here and there in the script as a whole, and I don't ignore those, but I can overlook them for the things that I do enjoy about the movie. The I think what my goal watching a movie is to really just overlook the issues I have with it and come out with the highest rating possible, because I want to enjoy myself when watching a film, and I know that that's what most people do. I'm very good at that. Like I've been able to kind of get my brain to a point where like it's very rare that I watch a movie that I just absolutely fucking hate.
Sure.
It just doesn't happen a lot. And I also know what movies to avoid now because of that. So thanks, Mama. But you know, honestly, my disdain for that movie is just going to turn into a meme if this show ever, you know, gets
It's
to a good
already an
point.
in
But
joke,
it's already an in joke, yeah.
a running joke. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, truthfully, like there are some of those problems throughout, but none of them are in, like if I'm making a pros and cons list, that's not on there for me,
Okay.
because those issues for me are not big enough to take away from my experience for the movie. The dialogue is something I cannot make apologies for, I cannot make excuses for, I cannot do anything to turn that around for anybody, because I don't agree with it. I can't defend that, and I so
Okay.
that's my only problem.
All right. That's your only problem. Interesting.
It's a
So,
very big problem. I just want to
yeah.
say that it's a very very big problem. But
Well, then I'm very, very interested to see where we come down on the verdicts. So
me
we've
too.
said everything. I mean, there's a lot more to talk about with this movie, but to keep this in a timely fashion, it's
Yeah.
time to come down to our final verdicts.
Yes.
And do you want me to go ahead and start?
I want to hear where you come down on this, because I think I know, but you've
Yeah, you
surprised me
probably know.
before.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah. Um.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah. This movie is. There's no excuse for this movie. There's no excuse for how many mistakes, how many rookie mistakes were put into this movie. It is a sequel to a film that heavily criticized, and the director apparently either learned nothing from that or doubled down. He doubled down on an over reliance on green screen effects to the detriment of his actors and just the overall atmosphere of the movie. He doubled down on um, unnecessary world building at the expense of concise storytelling. He doubled down on uh, maybe he's not capable of this, but the dialogue went from bad to worse to the worst, possibly. And the few things that I can say in defense of this movie are more defenses of what this movie could have been than the movie that I actually got to see. It is with a heavy heart that I have to say that I think Attack of the Clones is that bad. It is a 2.7 on Letterboxd. Honestly, I'm surprised it's not lower. It is my least favorite Star Wars movie to date, and I really don't see that changing.
Interesting. I like to see where you came down on that, good sir. Unfortunately, though, I have to now list my opinion.
Yeah, you do.
So,
It's gonna be fun.
it's amazing. Like, I don't truly understand how a movie could make me so happy 1 second and then so unbelievably angry the next. And by the way, those are two extreme highs, two extreme feelings. My feelings of appreciation for this are extremely high, and my feelings against this are extremely high as well. So it's weird, man. Like, there is so much conflict in me when it comes to watching this movie. Um, it is not at the bottom of my Star Wars ranking, not by far, actually.
Mhm.
Uh, and watching it this time around, especially, there were so many things that I was able to just sort of let go. That being said, I got even more angry about the dialogue. So I didn't know where I was going to come down at the end of this episode. Um, and I'm still very, very conflicted about what my last words should say, which normally you'd know I'm very prepared for this show most of the time. And this is one of those times that it's hard for me to actually nail down how I feel about this movie because of how conflicted I am. But at the time of this recording, I am going to say that Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones is not that bad.
Okay.
I wanted to come down on actually good so bad. And there are
I
so
was
many
scared you
reasons
would
that I
do
wanted
actually
to.
great just to
Oh
stick
no
it
no
to
no
our
no no no
listeners.
no! And I look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. Like, this is of all the original films from episode 4 all the way through to episode
The
3. I know that
George
sounds
Lucas
weird.
era.
The
Yeah.
George Lucas era of Star Wars, it is my least favorite of those.
Mm.
And I do like Rogue One more than this movie. But there are so many things that I truly love about this movie. And I really love how Padme gets to shine because I think she's a fantastic character, not talked about enough in the realm of movies. I really love the fact that we get to see. I love the fact that I got a romance that worked for me because that does not happen with me very often. But there are glaring issues with the dialogue that I cannot forgive that detract from my experience from the movie. So there will be a day that I think that I come down on actually good. Um, and that's a day where I think my house is burned down maliciously and I perish. But for now, you can put your pitchforks away. It is not that bad. I don't think a 2.7 is justified. I'm not going to say what I give it. If you want to find out, go follow me on Letterboxd. But that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to say today, it's not that bad.
Not that bad. Okay. I think this has been the most negative verdict, like by both of us, that neither one of us thought it was actually good.
I think so.
I'm curious if you, audience, go back and review. This might be a first. Yeah. Which isn't surprising. I'm glad that we had somebody here who was actually a defender of this movie. Because the last thing I want this podcast to be is just like a relentless like attack of the clones. No.
You son of a bitch. I knew you fit one in here. That was
Yeah,
amazing.
a relentless attack on a movie that's been beaten to death. I'm glad that we could say that we gave this movie, I think, a fair chance. And hey, I mean, this movie's stock is rising
It
after
is.
some of the recent Star Wars projects that we've seen. I don't know where this movie is going to be in 20 years. Maybe it'll finally be above a 3. That'd be interesting. Like when our kids grow up, where's this movie going to be for them?
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good point. I never
and
thought about that. That's cool.
yeah, and the other critical thing is you grew up with this movie. I did not. If I
Yes.
grew up with it, it might be like the Spider-Man 3 thing of like, yes, okay, it's not perfect, but I mean, it brings me so much joy. How can I join the hate? And how can I call this a bad movie?
That's how I feel about this one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and I bet there are a lot of people who grew up with this movie that are going to, carry on its legacy. I grew up with Revenge of the Sith, and I can forgive some of the flaws because it's flawed. It's flawed, but
It's
there's
got its
there's
problems.
yeah, there's a reason though why it's not eligible for this podcast.
Yes.
All right, guys. So I hope you enjoyed these 2 episodes of 2 of the most infamous movies of all time. These have been big episodes for us, and I hope that we did justice to the discourse here because honestly, it's kind of a minefield out there these days, especially when it comes to Star Wars. But
Whew.
thankfully, I think we have been respectful and have built a very respectful audience. So you guys have been great as you followed along on this journey with us. With that being said, it is time to wrap up. And it's also time to remind y'all that we do got a Patreon. Please, thank you, dear God. No, we have a Patreon. We have a goal
Oh
of
shit.
$100 a month so we can start putting out weekly content.
Yes.
And we've also put out a lot of really fun tiers. So if you want to support us and receive some cool things like advanced episodes or special episodes or any of that stuff, all you got to do is go to our Patreon and sign up.
Yes, not that patreon.com/slash not that bad is the link to go to. You can subscribe at any tier. That's right, any tier, even our lowest tier, and you have very early access to our specials. Originally, we were going to be releasing our specials a week after they air. That is not what we're going to be doing moving forward. In fact, as of right now, our last 2 specials are still exclusive to Patreon. And we have a really exciting special coming up in a few months. We have a really good special coming up this month. We have some good ones coming up in the future. So really excited. I hope you guys will check that out. I just want to thank my co-host here for agreeing to allow these Star Wars films on the show because I don't know that I'll get a chance to talk about Star Wars on here again. So the fact that I was able to bring something I love so much to the show has been awesome. But if you really enjoyed these episodes, you can also follow us on social media. You can go over to the Twitter and follow us at Not That Bad, M as in movie, P as in podcast, or on Facebook and Instagram at Not That Bad Pod. We'd love to have you. Love to talk about movies. You can see what we're dropping hints about our next film coming up. And we'd love to have you over there. So without further ado, I think that's all that we gotta. That's all the shilling and selling out that we have to do for this episode. So why don't you take us
Shilling and
out, Mr.
simping.
Tice?
That's what
Yeah,
we've been doing this
shilling and
whole.
simping
Yeah.
and unsanctioned buffoonery. That is
Yeah.
our brand.
Oh boy. So that's a perfect note to close out on. All right, guys. Enjoy your life until the next episode. I was going to say enjoy the holidays, but this is going to come out after the holidays are over.
Yes.
So just enjoy your lives. Don't just enjoy the holidays. Enjoy all of life. Until then, until the next episode, I'm Gabe.
I'm Connor.
This is Not That Bad. Signing out.